So let's take a look at the handout here. We're going to start with the first and second aorist passive indicative here. All right, so as we discussed a little earlier, we're dealing with the first and second aorist passive. These are forms that are past time, and because they're aorist, they're using the tense stem that portrays perfective aspect. And you remember that's the kind of portrayal of the verbal action where it's the summary, sort of snapshot, bounded whole view without respect to its unfolding in time. So the continuous aspect idea is not present with the aorist. Because we're dealing with passive tenses here, the first and second aorist passive, the subject is the patient. That is, the subject is not performing the action, but the subject is has the action done to the subject, okay? So verbs like he was eaten and they were killed. Good, wholesome things to do. Components of the form, because we're dealing with the aorist tense, it's past time, it's going to be augmented, and it's going to employ secondary tense forms because it's augmented. And so we're going to see the epsilon. If the verb stem begins with a consonant, we will lengthen the vowel if it begins with a vowel to augment it. Now, the Greek aorist passive tenses use the aorist passive tense stem. Remember, that is the sixth column in your principal parts list. We're not going to use the third column, the aorist passive indicative. The aorist passive tense forms do not use the same stem as the aorist active and aorist middle then. Sometimes the stems happen to be identical, but what I mean is if there's a chart, and there is, you're always going for the sixth column, not the third, because sometimes those stems will differ from one another, and you'll want to make sure you have the right one in mind. Okay, we use tense formatives for the aorist passive. Theta eta is our tense formative for the first aorist passive. Second aorist passive just uses the eta of the theta eta, so the theta is dropped. And I may have mentioned this on an earlier occasion, but when we're dealing with the second of a tense form compared to the first of it, the second is always lacking something that the first has. Think first aorist active, sigma alpha is the tense formative. Second aorist active, what's missing? The tense formative. So there is no sigma alpha at all. So the rule of thumb here is that whenever you have a first and a second available to you, the second is always shorter than the first in some way. All right? So notice the first aorist passive is theta eta. The second aorist is just eta. So it is shorter. It's missing something. Now, since we have tense formatives, both of which use vowels at the end, before the personal endings, we're not going to use a connecting vowel. We just go straight from the tense formative to the personal endings. And then the last thing, and this is the thing that is the worst part of it's not really the worst part, it's just the most unusual part of the aorist passive, is that we're going to be using the secondary active personal endings. This is a passive stem. We expect to use middle passive personal endings. The aorist passive is going to use the secondary active personal endings. So our example here is eleuthes. There's my augment, the aorist passive stem, which happens to be lu for luo, which happens to be identical to the aorist active stem. That's okay. That does happen frequently. Theta eta for my tense formative, and here I have the second person singular personal ending for the secondary active endings. So eleuthes. And how would I translate this? You were loosed. That's right. Very good. Just a simple past time action for the tense, and make it passive though. You were loosed. All right. Let's take a look at the forms as they actually show up then. So we'll begin with the first aorist concept. We'll talk about the second here in just a minute. But the first aorist passive is going to use those secondary active personal endings, and the tense formative is theta eta all the way through. And remember, we have to augment these forms as well. My real endings for the secondary active are these, but they are going to be modified over here Okay, and so what's going to end up happening is I'm going to have these resultant endings. The theta, eta with the mu becomes nu, so thane, thase, they, thamen, theta, and thesan. This son ending you have seen in the past. It's not the standard third person plural ending, but it is used here. And we saw it with egnon, he knew, or I knew. The third person plural was egnoson. All right, so let's just practice writing these. You have the handout in front of you. You can practice with me. So augment, aorist passive stem, first person singular. I'm going to use theta, eta, and then what's my personal ending here? Nu. Okay, so eleuthane. How would you translate that? I was loosed. Okay, I was loosed. Now, for the second, it's elu, theta, eta, what? Sigma. Good. And we would translate that as you were loosed. Now, do not get this theta, eta, sigma here on the second singular, first aorist passive indicative, confused with the theta, eta, sigma of another tense that you are learning, which is the future passive. Remember that tense formative is theta, eta, sigma. The sigmas are doing different things here. This sigma is the personal ending, future passive, theta, eta, sigma. That whole thing is the tense formative. Okay, third singular, elu, the. Elu, the. There would have been a tau here. The tau has dropped off because tau's at the end of the word cannot stay. Greek throws in the tau. He, she, it was loosed. Okay. First person plural, eleuthe men. Not metha, which is what I just started writing because I was telling you not to write it. Eleuthe men. Not metha, because we can't use the middle passive endings. We've got to use the active ones. So we were loosed. And then second plural, eleuthe te. Good. So this is y'all were loosed. And then last, eleuthe son. Good. Eleuthe son. And this is they were loosed. Okay? Got the forms? How come the sigma doesn't drop here? Yeah, good question. I need the sigma to know that this is actually the personal ending here. And the sigmas tend to drop out between connecting vowels and personal endings. There's no connecting vowel here, though. Okay. All right. Now, here's something important to notice, or to note. Some verbs have second aorist passive forms instead of first aorist passive forms. Okay. That means that we're going to use the second aorist passive tense formative. As we mentioned, it's always missing something that's in the first aorist tense formative. Instead of theta, eta, we just have the plain eta here. And very important, just because a verb has a second aorist in the active and middle doesn't mean it will have a second aorist in the aorist passive. Okay? And just because a verb in the aorist active and middle, just because it has a second aorist passive doesn't mean it'll have a second aorist active and middle. In other words, they can be the exact opposite from one to the other. Let me give you an example here. Okay, the word Groffo. In the aorist active, it's a first aorist. So if you look at my forms here, I have egropsa. You see the sigma alpha is embedded here in the psi and that alpha. So that is a first aorist tense formative for the active. So egropsa, I wrote. Egropsas, you wrote, and so forth. It's first aorist in the active and middle, but when we get to the aorist passive, Groffo does not use a first aorist passive formation, although you might have expected it because it's a first aorist when it's active. It actually uses the second aorist for its passive formation. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take Groff, okay, I will augment it But instead of theta eta, what am I going to add if it takes a second aorist passive?
Eta.
I just want to add the eta, okay? So graphe, and then I use all the same endings that I'm using for the first aorist passive, which are the secondary endings. And over here, I forgot to change these. So, yes. Yeah, like, what is that? So take a look there, graphe son. Okay, so please make those changes. I thought I had removed those news and put the right endings here. Okay, so graph, and not thane, but graphane. I was written. So these will all sound funny because usually people aren't written, but I could think of some context in which you might say this. In honor of Valentine's Day. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, I was written on your heart. Yes, indeed, my dear, you was written. Definitely not Shakespeare. Okay.
So with telling whether or not like a verb, how it forms in the active and the passive, that would be just a matter of memorizing the different principal parts that are in the
Yes. So basically for Groffo, the present, the future, and the aorist actives, those are all very normal. So Groffo is not one where I would say you would want to learn all the principal parts, because if you just know how to form the future tense and you know how to form the aorist tense, they follow standard forms. It's really the fact that I have an aorist passive that uses a second instead of a first. So that's the one principal part of Groffo that I would say you need to memorize. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This might be a bad question. Why is the accent on the alpha for the singulars instead of the epsilon? Because each of those only have 3 syllables.
Yeah. It's an issue with rules for accent in Greek. If I have a long vowel here, then I can't accent 3 from the end. I have to slide over. So yeah, so we're good on all these now. All right. So I apologize about my mistakes here, but having provided you a handout should make atonement for my sins. Okay. Let's look at the first and second future passive indicative. Once we know the aorist passive, doing future passive is not too hard. All right, so in terms of the basics here, we're going to use the future for, not past time, for future time, okay? So we use the future for future time, and it does portray a perfective or undefined aspect, okay? So there's no progressive notion to the future. It's just a simple portrayal of the action as a bounded whole. As a passive tense, the subject is the patient of the action. So in a future passive, it'll be translated something like, he will be eaten, they will be killed. Let's look at the form's components now. Is there going to be an augment in the future passive? No. And the reason being that it's not a past time tense, and so it's not augmented, and therefore we don't need to use one of those. Now, as far as the stem that's chosen, the Greek future passive is going to use the aorist passive stem. That is to say, there is no separate future passive stem. It borrows the aorist passive for its formation. So whatever the 6-column form is, in the principal parts, the form you'll be given is the aorist passive indicative for singular. How do you find what stem to use for the future passive? You strip away augments, tense formatives, and personal endings, and you're left with the future, with the aorist passive stem, and that's what the future passive will use. All right, the tense formative is almost the same as the aorist passive's tense formative. If it's a future passive, that's a first future, it's using theta, eta, sigma. So if it helps you to think of it this way, theta, eta would be this idea that makes it passive, sigma makes it future, okay? And then over here, if it's a second futures are always shorter than first futures. Second future is always missing something that the first has, and here it's missing the theta, so it's just eta sigma, okay? Now, of course, remember your sigmas will be non-final sigmas ultimately because of the fact that they're going to be in the middle of the word. They won't be word final. Okay? Connecting vowels. Here's the deal. With our aorist passive tense formative, it was theta eta. That tense formative ended with a vowel. Theta eta sigma does not end with a vowel, does it?
No.
So I'm going to use my good old well-known connecting vowels after this tense formative. Just as I did with the regular future active. That one was a sigma, and I got to put the omicron and epsilon after that. And then for the personal endings, since we're outside of the augmented tense forms, we're outside of the past time, we are going to use the primary endings. But looky here, we are using the middle passive personal endings in the future passive. That's different from the aorist passive, which uses the secondary active endings. In other words, the future passive does what we expect passive tenses to do, which is to use the middle passive endings. So it is the aorist passive that is the only one that's naughty in this regard. It's the only passive tense that uses active endings. Okay, so example, we have lu, the, sa, mai. Lu is our aorist passive stem, which is used for the future passive. Theta, eta, sigma is my first future tense formative. Connecting vowel is omicron in front of mai, which is my first singular form. So how would I want to translate lu, the, sa, mai?
You will be loose.
Not you. My is I.
I will be loose.
I will be loosed. Okay, good. So it's passive and future. So here is how this is going to look when we actually start to build the forms. No augments, but using the aorist passive stem. Lu, 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 lu. Tense formative, thase, thase, thase. Connecting vowels are alternating between omicron and epsilon depending upon what the real ending is. My, sai, tai, methus, they, tai. And then the modified endings are not these. We don't have any modified ones here. I accidentally left that column in. So we're going to get thesamai, these, thesatai, thesamen, thesate, and thesantai. This second person singular form is the only one that is problematic. Why is it a problem? Yes. So here I have lu, thase, sai. So here, remember connecting vowel, and then I've got this sigma that's between the connecting vowel and the other vowels. That's where we get intervocalic sigma dropping out. This sigma is also between two vowels, but that's not a connecting vowel before it, okay? So it's usually I have a connecting vowel before, and then a sigma, and then a vowel. That's when I'm going to see that intervocalic sigma dropping out. So that becomes lu, the, se, not psi, but lu, the, se, I. Epsilon, alpha, contract to what? Eta. Very good. And then what will happen to the iota when I have a long vowel before it? That's quite long, isn't it? It will subscript. Okay, so it becomes that. Okay, good. So you see that? See how that happens? So luthese, luthese. Okay, good. So let's build our forms real quickly here, shall we? All right, so future passive, and this luo takes a first future passive formation. So it's lu, thase, amai. Okay, lu, thase, amai. What does lu, thase, amai mean? I will be loosed. Okay, all right. Now, second singular, lu, they, sesai becomes lu, they, say, with the iota subscript under that eta. Okay, and that's you will be loosed. He, she, it will be loosed. Lu, they, se, tai. Got my tai ending. My se tai. That's he, she, it will be loosed. First plural. Lu, they, what? Is it sumen? No. Not men, but metha. Lu, they, sametha. Okay, my accent's been on the eta here. It's got to shift over one because I have two syllables after. I can't put the acute accent more than 3 from the back. Okay? So that's we will be loosed. Second plural, lu, they, what? Ses, they. Lu, they, ses, they. And that means y'all will be loosed. And finally, lu, they, sa, tai. Lu, they, san, tai, and that is they will be loosed. Okay? So all these are translated the same way except for the subject. Okay? All right. Good. Now, as with the aorist passive, some verbs have second future passive forms instead of first future passives. How will you know if a verb will use a second future passive formation when you want to form it?
It'd be like when you notice with the aorist.
Exactly. Is there such a thing as a first and a second future active differentiation? No. That's only a differentiation between the aorist. Aorist active can be first or second aorist active, right? But we didn't have differences in terms of our futures. And this means that when we have a second future, we shouldn't even be thinking about whether there was a second future active, okay? The issue is, did it have a second aorist passive? If a verb has a second aorist passive instead of a first aorist passive, then that aorist passive stem will have a second future passive when it's used for the future passive. Okay? And so that means that our verb groffo is going to use a second future passive. Okay? There is no first future active. I don't know why I have that there. So just a future active is gropso, gropse, gropse. I will write, you will write, he will write, and so forth. But here, it's graphesamai instead of what I would have expected with normal aorist, future passives would have been graphesamai. You see that? That's what I should have had. But since it's a second, I need to drop that theta. Graphesamai. Okay, so say these with me. Graphesamai. I will be written. So graphese. You will be written. Graphesatai. So he, she, or it will be written. Graphesamatha. We will be written. Grapheseste. You or y'all will be written. And graphesantai. They will be written. All right. There you go. So those are our forms. If we look at Mounce 24.10, we've gone through the basic formation. There are going to be some problem areas, okay? And here we have verbal stems where the stem ends with a stop. What are our stop consonants? That's right. That's right. Good. So that the labials, the velars, and the dentals, okay? So whenever we have those consonants, we're going to have some problems here because putting a theta after these is going to create some issues. Now, take a look at what we have here. We have a P followed by a theta and a beta followed by a theta. Okay? Now, here's what I want you to think about for just a minute. How do you pronounce the P sound? P. P. So what is happening to the airflow? It's getting completely blocked, right? And that's why these are technically called stops, okay? So because we're stopping airflow, okay? Now, pronounce the theta sound. Th. Do you completely drop or stop the airflow? No. So this is what in linguistics we call a fricative, okay? A fricative is a consonant that doesn't stop the air, but it narrows the opening through which the air flows, but it still allows the air to pass through. So what I'm doing is I'm butting up next to each other, two consonants that have different ways or manners of being articulated. One's a stop, and at the same time, one's blowing air through it. Those are the opposite, in a sense. And in language, what we often are trying to do is we're trying to get our sounds to coordinate with one another so that they're similar, because that's the easier way to pronounce things, okay? So to try to come up with a p followed by a th sound at the same time is difficult. And so in order to accommodate this, language undergoes a phonetic process called assimilation. How many of you have heard of the Borg in Star Trek? You guys know about the Borg, right? The Borg were going around assimilating civilizations, making them like their own. The process of doing it was quite nasty. At least in Greek, assimilation is a little bit nicer. It just involves sounds becoming similar. So what's going to happen here? Well, P and beta, what kind of consonants are they? They're labials, right? They're labials. And so what's going to happen? They're going to stay labial, but they're going to become the fricative version of the labial. What is the fricative labial? We have p and b are full stops. What's the third labial in our square of quote-unquote stops? Not psi. That's what happens when you add a sigma to a labial. It's phi. It's phi. So let's review those consonants here real quickly, because this will hopefully make some sense to you once you see this. So we have P, beta, phi, kappa, gamma, what? Chi. Good. And then our dentals were tau, delta, and theta. Okay, so these are the genuine stops. One of the things, I mean, you just got to live with the fact that Mounce does things a certain way. He calls this the square of stops, but technically only the first two columns are stops, okay? And the fricatives are the third column. Okay, so what am I doing? I'm keeping my labial nature of the P and the beta, but I'm using the fricative version of the labial in order to interact nicely with the theta. So this becomes, okay, so both of them are going to be similar to each other in that they're both fricatives now. That's a lot easier than, okay? Sounds like I'm spitting. Okay, and beta, theta becomes phi, theta as well. All right, so example here, we'll just look at one. So we have our word blep, okay? So what am I going to do to make this aorist passive? Add my augment, add blep, and then I'm going to add theta, eta, and for first singular new, blep, thane. What's going to be the phonetic change here? This preceding P will become what? Thade, or phi, sorry. So I get ablethane, ablethane. And so this is I was seen. I was seen. All right? So take a look at the issues of kappa, velar, plus a theta, and gamma, plus a theta. These are stops, aren't they? But they're preceding fricative theta for the theta eta tense formative. And so what do you think the gamma and the kappa will want to do? Yes, they'll want to become the fricative version of their velar counterparts. So we get, okay. So our example here, we have our verb deoko. I pursue or persecute uses deok. If I want to say I was pursued or persecuted, future aorist passive, use the augment, stem, add thane, and what's going to happen to the kappa here? Before the theta, it becomes the chi. So, de och thane, de och thane. All right, so I was chased or persecuted. All right. Now, Our last situation that we see here is when I have things like tau, theta, delta, theta, and theta, followed by the theta of the tense formative. What's going to happen in all these cases? I am going to get a dissimilation. I'm going to get the dentals will become a sigma before the theta. Okay? So they become a sigma before the theta. Let's take baptizo. Baptid is my stem for the aorist passive. Baptid. I was baptized. Put an augment here. Baptid, thane. The delta theta, what's that going to become? Yeah, it's going to become sigma theta. So ebaptis thane. Okay? Ebaptis thane. All right, so that's how that works. You'll see similar sort of situations happening if you want to make these future passive, right? If you have these stems with stops and you need to add theta, eta, sigma, you're going to get the same kind of phonetic interactions. Okay, well, let's stop there.